Hi everyone, Mercedes Terrell here, and today we're tackling a powerful question from one of you. How can I create a community based on integrity when I was a sexy bikini model? What a very human question to ask. As humans, we are super skeptical of anything that reaches beyond the patterns and paradigms that we're used to. Why? Well, because there is an archaic primal part of us that reminds us constantly that what's known is safe and what's unknown is not. And when this voice is really loud in us, it directs us to stay in our little zones of familiarity, staying within the confines of what we know. Even if what we know isn't actually proving to be healthiest or beneficial to us, we will often stay there because this archaic primal part of us believes that staying within what's familiar is how we keep ourselves safe. Be it the influences we get from our upbringings, our cultures, or any other factors that domesticate us along our route, we accumulate our zones of familiarity and sometimes become very rigid about expanding these zones or extending their limits. Obviously, the more we confine ourselves, the less full spectrum our experiences become. We miss what is beyond our limits. We hinder our own access to positive possibilities outside of our comfort zones, and we thereby squelch our own positive evolution and expansion. So when it comes to navigating something like our sexuality, a very charged and sensitive topic for many of us, we risk probing the boundaries of that rigid, archaic internal voice that says, don't go too far, it's not safe out there. And because in our culture, sexuality is perhaps the most taboo and often controversial subject, it stands to reason that when we're confronted with the sexual expression of someone else, who has different rules and limitations in this area, it can freak us out a bit. It can be scary. And when we get scared, that archaic, rigid, primal part of us jumps online, says, this isn't familiar, so it's not safe, slams the door shut on that potential for personal expansion. The reality is that when it comes to the expansion of our own sensual side, most of us have to subconsciously face some fear or shame or guilt to even begin to address this primal part of us with an open mind, which is why we often don't. We may not even realize it in the moment, but we often shut down internally when we're confronted with someone else's willingness to be sensually expressive, if it's beyond our own personal comfort level of expressing ourselves sensually. This is something I've put a lot of my own time and attention on, especially in my personal inner work, and it's an avenue that I really hope I can help others traverse with less shame and more radical acceptance, because I do believe that our ability to be sexually expressive and explorative is a foundational pillar of attaining self-mastery. And although I never went as far as shooting fully nude or pornographic content, I expanded my limits to the degree that felt right for me. I confronted my personal demons around sexuality, my lack of self-worth, my desire to be accepted and loved, and I came out the other side having integrated these shadowy parts of myself into something I now use to guide others through their own obstacles. So with that, and in order to answer the question, how can I create a community based in integrity when I was a sexy bikini model, I'll put it to words in this way. My previous modeling career, long before I started an OnlyFans or did any of that sexy modeling, was largely based on my need at the time for external validation to feel worthwhile or valuable or lovable. Before I started an OnlyFans page, I was actually quite rigid around other people's sexual expression as well. I judged other people who would shoot nude or display themselves in any sexual manner that I deemed too sexy or too objectifying. However, after doing my own inner work, looking at how I held shame in my body and how I'd reached desperately for validation through sexual objectification for so many years, I could finally see how and why I'd become that way. I uncovered the origin stories that led me to seek my value through how other people perceived me. I realized the truth behind the untrue stories around sex and sexuality that I'd been indoctrinated with since I was a young child. And little by little, I came into my own sovereignty to deciding for myself who I am and what of that I would offer to the world. One of the first ways that I made this offering was through my sexual expression, and this is when the opportunity to create an OnlyFans page arose, and it felt right to move into that choice from such a strong sense of self. This was the first time I was choosing from a conscious, sovereign place and not from fear or scarcity or striving for validation or acceptance, but simply because it was what felt most healing and most important for me to do for me. And I took that sense of inner certainty quite literally and launched my OnlyFans page with the disclaimer to my followers that if they chose to join me there, that they would be getting access to content that made me feel subjectively sexy while creating. It wasn't about what they wanted. And it's easy for me to take radical ownership of the content I created during that era of my career because it was so clearly me. I enjoyed all of the creation process. I reveled in the art of it and in the rebellious spirit of it too. And I gratefully invested the money that presented itself to me for being fully in my own body and in my own delicious, sovereign, sensual expression. I savored all of it. I experienced some serious absolution of shame around my sexuality and my physical body. I found a better balance in relationship to men and their objective gaze, and reclaimed my sense of self-worth and validity from the external sources that I'd been storing it in for so long. And I realized that my experience is rare and unique. I know that many women have a very different, maybe almost opposite experience than what I'm describing. And perhaps for me, it has something to do with the fact that I didn't begin my OnlyFans page or my sexy modeling content till I was in my late 30s with a lot of life and experience under my belt, or perhaps it was because I found this avenue of my journey during a global pandemic where I had the time and focus to go inward and make very intentional and conscious decisions through each step of the way. And maybe for me, it was simply the perfect storm where preparedness and opportunity aligned, gifting me with an unexpected way of furthering my personal evolution. After a while of being in that space, though, of wielding my sensual side in a way that felt very empowering and very healing, I got to a point where I felt ready to move on. And so I did. And yes, it was in the height of my success, quote unquote, whatever that means, on OnlyFans, that I decided I was ready to move on. And this was perplexing to those in my life who were very money focused, more money focused than I am. But my sexy OnlyFans venture was never about the external validation or the money for me. And I can say that with confidence because when I decided to shift my efforts on that platform to focus on my psycho-spiritual coaching and education programs, I did it with ease, without fear, and with a knowing that I am here to experience the full spectrum of what life has to offer me, even if that means the discomfort and struggles that come with changing career directions. So I am thrilled to be on this adventure and to see what new unknown thing is around each corner. And here I am now, growing a community of people who are brave enough to face themselves, adventurous enough to peer beyond the current limitations, and open to sharing their thoughts, experiences, and guidance to those on a similar path. As the person hosting this community, I can show up in integrity because I've done the work to take responsibility for myself and my choices, to know all other humans as extensions of me, to relinquish judgment and replace it with acceptance and love. If my story and this offering of community resonates with you, I hope you'll join me by becoming a member of Oracle so that we can begin our adventure together.